Okay, hey, good morning. How's everybody doing? Happy Sunday. Glad you guys are here. My name is Drake. I'm the pastor here. It's an honor to have you gathering with us today. All right. I'm really glad to have you guys here. It's going to be a good day. You excited? Okay, very good. So like I said, my name is Drake. I'm the pastor here. Our mission, the reason we planted City Church 7 years ago, was to help people find their way to God from where they are. And we do that by practicing the way of Jesus together in Boulder. And so what that means for you is no matter where you're walking in on your spiritual journey, you are loved, you're safe, you're welcome. We're really glad to have you here. Our desire is to meet you where you are, wherever that is, and help you take some next steps toward Jesus. Does that sound okay? Okay. For 3 of you, that's going to be great. For the rest of you, that's all right. Hang out. All right. I have one quick announcement for you, and then we're going to continue in our series in Matthew. We are currently in our summer series through the gospel, the eyewitness account of Matthew, where we go verse by verse through this entire 28-chapter eyewitness account of the life and the works and the death and burial and resurrection of Jesus. We started this series last summer, got through chapter 7. Starting back up this summer, we're going to get somewhere through, I think, like a chapter 11 this summer, and then we'll pick it back up again and see how year 3 handles it. Is that cool with you guys? Okay, not that you have a choice, but that's where we're going. I'm just letting you know. As always, you can go back on our podcast, our YouTube channel, and pick up the work that we're doing as a community. Again, because we're helping people find their way to God from where they are by practicing the way of Jesus together, our weekends and our groups work hand in hand to take what we're doing here shoulder to shoulder and then pushing those into our lives as we gather face to face. Does that make sense? So, those things work together. Glad to have you here. Really quick announcement. We have an all-team meeting coming up August 16th from 12:30 to 2:30 right after that Sunday gathering. So if you are an active member here at City Church, that means that you've gone through Growth Track, you've signed the team document, you are serving and participating in life rhythms of community, weekends and groups, giving, etc. If you're an active member of this church, then we're inviting you to this all-team meeting. If you are not currently on the team, this meeting is not for you. You're welcome to join the team. Then this meeting would be for you. But otherwise, we'll just give you a high five and then go from there. So will somebody really fast go, thank you, Daniel. You got it. What sounds like a T-Rex outside is actually just our AC unit deciding to start and stop. So hang tight for a second. But we got to turn it off now before it really is a T-Rex. Okay. So this all-team meeting, here's why we're doing this. This is important, and you need to know this. This Sunday, you need to mark your calendars. Hey, just turn you got to turn it off. You got to turn cool off and off. This is awesome. On the podcast, people are going to be like, what is happening? Okay, so the reason this matters, you need to mark your calendars even if you're not on the team, because this is a special Sunday, August 16th. We have one of our partners from India coming into town. We do a lot of work with all kinds of partners around the world, but on this Sunday, we have one of our special partners from India coming in. He's going to be with us sharing all that God is doing, all that God has been doing over the last year. He was here this last summer. Because of security reasons, we can't use his name on our online streaming services that day. There will be no live stream and no recording of the service. So if you're not in the room, you're not going to know what's going on, okay? It's really important. But because of persecution in their area, we can't have their name online. We can't have their stories online. And so really, really excited to have him here and really excited for you to hear all that's going on, as well as hear the new initiatives that we are partnering with them for, some new opportunities that we have to partner with them in prayer and financially. So that is that Sunday morning normal gathering, okay? Everybody tracking? And then right after, what's really cool, we're having an all-team meeting with him to talk more about how our church is going to partner directly with them, to talk about the mission and the vision and the direction of our church, to talk about our budget and finances, all of that. So that's a team meeting following the gathering. Everybody tracking with me? Okay, an email's going out. This is on our website. You can RSVP for childcare, etc. But please mark your calendars. This is going to be a really special day. Everybody feel good about it? All right, there you go. Now, back to Matthew. Last week, we were going through the book of Matthew, and we looked at the power of storytelling. And if you remember, I gave you the Lord of the Rings trilogy, right? It's kind of the power of a story. And so I gave you kind of the building blocks of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and how my kids were kind of feeling left out when we only let them watch movie 1 because it was getting kind of creepy, and they were like, ooh. But then at the end of movie 1, they were like, is that it? And I was like, no, man, there's like 2 more movies and there's so much happening. And we talked about the power of a story, and Matthew is leaning into that. Matthew is telling the eyewitness account, his experience of following Jesus, and he is leaning into the power of stories and how a good story makes you lean in, but also a good story has a point, a purpose. And so Matthew told us 3 stories last week, all with a crescendo, leading us to a point of asking this question: who is this man? Who is Jesus? And what are we going to do with him? So that's what we dealt with last week. And as we continue on our journey through Matthew, he's going to continue to lean into the momentum of storytelling. But what's really cool today is we now come to one of the most personal moments in the gospel account. Again, when you hear the word gospel, it just means good news. It's the good news account, the eyewitness account of Matthew, one of Jesus' followers, okay? And what we read today is actually Matthew's encounter with Jesus. So we have all of these other stories of people encountering Jesus in the crescendo, and Jesus being not only Lord over nature, he calms the storm, and Lord over the supernatural, he cast out demons, and then Lord over humanity. He has the ability to forgive sins and to make us new. And so now Matthew transitions to making this story personal, to where he encounters Jesus himself. And again, he left us with the question, who is Jesus? And if he really is who he said he is, what are we going to do with Jesus? Matthew wanted us to conclude from last week that Jesus is Lord over all. Now listen, I know that you might be walking in on different places in your spiritual journey. Some of you have been following Jesus for a long time. Some of you are brand new to Jesus. Some of you are skeptical. Maybe you've walked away from church or stayed away from church for a long time. Maybe you're familiar with the stories of Jesus or information about Jesus, but you're not really sure how that has any bearing on your life, how it rolls into Monday, and does it even really matter? Some of you are wrestling like, man, I actually maybe kind of want the stuff for Jesus to be true, but I'm trying to figure out how that works into my real life and what I'm going to do with that. No matter where you are, Matthew is inviting all of us to consider who is Jesus and what are we going to do with him. And Matthew's conclusion is telling. Not only are his stories telling us who he is, but now we're going to watch Matthew's response to Jesus. You guys ready? All right, let's look at the power of a story, starting in verse 9. As Jesus goes on from the location he was just before this, healing the paralytic in a house, he sees a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. Let's take just a moment, okay? A couple of things. And again, the reason we do a walkthrough through Matthew, verse by verse, like we're doing, is just teaching us, reminding us of what it looks like to interact with the biblical text. Not to just read into it a little devotional thought so we can get like good feelings and good vibes out of it for ourselves, but rather, who was Matthew writing to? How is his original audience hearing what's being recorded, and then how do we then translate that and apply it to our lives, okay? So here we are. Matthew's writing. Jesus goes on, and he sees a man named Matthew. I want you to know this is important. Matthew's going to play on this seeing in just a moment. He has another account in just a moment. Jesus sees him. You see people. But what do you see when you look at someone else? For everyone else surrounding Jesus, including his disciples, and definitely the religious leaders of the day, you're going to see it in a moment, when they see Matthew, they see a disgusting human being, a traitor to their very people, a sellout to Rome, someone who's interested in protecting themselves and robbing others for their own good. But when Jesus sees Matthew, he sees all of that and more. And Matthew wants you to know that Jesus saw him. All of him. And so maybe another question we could ask is not how do you look at other people, but how do you see yourself? When you think of God, I think it's Blaise Pascal that said that I'm probably butchering this quote, but whatever you think about God is the most important thing about you. And so when you think about God looking at you, what do you think he sees? What do you see? Are you pretty all right? Haven't robbed any banks lately? Feeling pretty good about that? You know, there's like the way we view our lives kind of Monday through Friday and the working hours and then maybe close, but then what about when you're alone? What about when it's quiet? What about late at night? When the voices in your head and the stirrings of your heart get a little louder? Like how do you see yourself? How do you view yourself? And Matthew wants us to know that Jesus saw him. There's plenty of people around, but Jesus sees Matthew, all of him. And somehow when Jesus looks at Matthew, he sees all of him, all of the brokenness, everything that everyone else sees, but he also sees incredible value. And he wants you to know the same, that Jesus sees all of you. God is not this like impersonal force where you just kind of live a certain kind of life and be a good person and then you get like the lottery at the end of your lifetime. God is personal, and he sees you, all of you, the beautiful parts and the absolutely devastating and broken parts. And he sees him at the tax collector's booth. At the tax collector's booth. So again, Matthew is a sellout to Rome. He is literally working for the Roman government, and Rome is like taxing the mess. You guys remember Robin Hood, right? Right, when and Little John and all the, right? And so you have the sheriff of Nottingham, and he's robbed, you remember how that he's a villain, right? You're like, boo, right? That's the tax collectors of the day. Not only is Rome doing a ridiculous tax on the Jewish people, but the tax collectors could come back with their own authority because they have the entire Roman army behind them, and then add to those taxes whatever they want to fill their own pockets. And so this is a Jewish man, Matthew is, who has sold out to the Roman Empire in order to benefit himself. He is completely ostracized from community. Everyone is like completely hates his guts, but also he's got a Roman centurion standing next to him and they can't do anything about it. And so this guy, Jesus sees this guy, and we're going to see the response in a moment. But to ride the train of our Lord of the Rings trilogy really fast, you guys remember this moment where Frodo's like at Mount Doom, and he's got the ring, and the whole mission, all 3 movies have been leading up to this moment where he's standing at the volcano and he's going to throw the ring in and everything's going to be better and evil is vanquished. You guys remember this moment? And then you remember what happens? There's this like turning in Frodo's heart where like he's like, JK, I'm going to keep it for myself. Right? You guys remember that moment? So if you remember, and if you're not familiar with the Lord of the Rings trilogy, sorry about you. Like get with the times, okay? That's what I like, okay? Listen, I know the World Cup's happening. This is just the best analogy I have, okay? So if you got better analogies, give them to me. But many characters throughout the Lord of the Rings series believe, when they look at the ring, they believe that the ring is going to bring the answer to all their problems, right? Like it represents power and security and the ability to make the world better, right? So you have all these different characters that they want to leverage the ring for their own, like, hey, let's try to use it for good. Right? Then over and over again, what we see happening is people try to get a hold of the ring, and then it corrupts them. It enslaves them. It crushes them. And you watch this play out all the way, and Frodo's like the good guy. He's pure in heart, and sure enough, at the end, his heart too is being twisted by the power of the ring. And so it is with our own efforts to fix what is broken in our lives and in the world. So Matthew, if you will, has taken up tax collecting as his ring of power. Right? He put all of his hope, all of his faith, all of his trust in this positional moment to secure himself with financial well-being, with pleasure, with protection from Rome, right? He's choosing to abandon everything else, seeking the good life, and his decision is, you know what? As bad as some of this is, if I can get a hold of this ring of power, then I'm gonna be living the good life. And Matthew wants you to connect the dots there. Everyone's chasing after the ring. All of us have this thing in our hearts where we're trying to get a hold of the ring of power, if you will, that thing that's going to fix what is broken, the things that are going to give us security, the things that are going to make things better in us and around us. So for Matthew, right, it was the tax collecting booth. That was his effort at a good life, to try to control and manipulate things in his favor. For the story before this, there's the paralytic guy. There's a guy that was literally brought on a mat. He couldn't walk, probably completely paralyzed or quadriplegic. And they bring him to Jesus for the purpose of being made whole. And then Jesus looks at the man, and instead of making his body well, he says, your sins are forgiven. And everybody's like, thanks for that. But we really showed up for something else, right? And so let's think about it. If you're the paralyzed man, all of your hope is in your body being made well. So again, what is his ring of power? His body being made whole with Jesus, and Jesus had a different agenda. Now, Jesus actually does end up healing his body, but only to demonstrate that he was who he said he was, and that he could do what he said he would do. And so for Matthew, it's a tax collector's booth. For the paralyzed guy, it was his body being made whole again. What is it for you? Right? Like when I was, 15, 16 years old, it was relationships, it was popularity, success in high school. Then you graduate college and like maybe it's career, maybe it's accolades, what people think about you, it's success. What is it for you? Pleasure, materialism, a house, one dog, 2.5 kids and a picket fence. You can't get those in Boulder anymore, but you know what I mean. A condo, costs you an arm and a leg. You can't afford a kid. Put them in the closet maybe. What is it for you? Matthew's telling a story. Jesus sees him and he sees his identity. He sees where he's put his security. He sees where all of his self-worth is wrapped up in. And again, there's something going on in this story. This guy is a traitor. Everyone hates his guts. Matthew knew who he was. Matthew knew what he was holding on to. And he's heard of Jesus at this point, okay? It's not like Jesus shows up out of the blue and he's never seen this guy and he has this moment. No, everyone's heard of Jesus at this point. Jesus has got some wild street cred at this point. And Jesus crosses his path. Let's go back to the verse 9. He goes on. Jesus looks at Matthew and he says, "Follow me." And Matthew gets up and follows him. Now listen, this is Matthew's account of his own story with Jesus, okay? So he could add, he could take away, he could fabricate, he could do a lot, but instead he gives us this very simple account. There I was sitting at my tax collector's booth, being hated by everyone, but filling my own pockets, living the good life to the best of my ability, and Jesus walks up and he says these words to me, "Follow me." And I did. You're like, really? That seems so simple. I want you to notice this. Jesus didn't just see Matthew, but he called him. He didn't just see him, but he invited him into relationship. You see, what I love about Matthew's story is that Matthew wasn't looking for Jesus. Do you notice that? Right? It's not like there are stories where people are looking for Jesus, and that's great. But in this scenario, Matthew's not. He's just doing his job. It's just Monday. He's at the office doing his thing, and then Jesus shows up, and he says, "Follow me." The number of times, friends, that I have a meeting with somebody, like we live in one of the most unchurched cities in America. We live in a space of spiritual pluralism. We have a hyper-spiritual context, but then when it comes to Jesus, there's lots of wrestling. And so the number of times that I sit at a coffee meeting or share a beer with somebody, and we're talking about their story, and they're telling me all the things that are going on, and they're wrestling with more than okay, the ring thing, like I've tried to chase the ring, it's not working, so they're looking for more, right? And Jesus he makes the list. He's like, okay, maybe Jesus is the more that I'm looking for. They got all the questions, they're wrestling and figuring it out, and it's hard, and I don't know how this fits, and I've got these questions, and I don't like this part of Jesus, and all that's going on, and I'll listen to people tell me their story, and they're all so very unique and different. But over and over again, I can sit at a table and hear someone's story, and as they begin to describe what's going on in their heart and their life, many times I will just quiet my heart. And as soon as they're done telling me their story, I just smile. And I say, man, you might not be able to see it, but God is pursuing you. Like, I know you feel like you've got all this work on your trying to figure out who Jesus is, but everything that's happening in your heart, the unrest, the discontent with the ring, trying to look for more, God is actually chasing you. It's the favorite part of my story. All through high school, I'm chasing success and popularity and girls and pleasure. And the whole time, Jesus is chasing me. I just didn't know it. And many of you, you've been there where you look back on your story and you're like, whoa. Like God was chasing me through all of that. And I finally just realized it. And that's this moment for Matthew. Jesus calls him. Jesus said in John 6, "No one comes to the Father unless the Father who sent me draws them." As in your and I, our capacity to even consider our need for God is God's gift to our hearts in general. Does that make sense? Like we don't manufacture one day hey God, I think I'll give you a chance. It's God's grace in our hearts that we even consider and be aware of our need for something more. To see the ring for what it is. It's God's grace that wakes us up to our need for him in the first place. C.S. Lewis says it this way, that pain is God's megaphone to a broken world. As in God, he won't violate our free will, right? You have to choose for yourself, but he will work through all kinds of amazing circumstances to get your attention, right? And plenty of people in this room are following Jesus in your lives have been turned upside down because of God's goodness and grace, right? Yes? Anybody? A couple of you? All right, very good. But also your story is connected to God getting your attention through some hard stuff, yes? Yeah, absolutely. Daniel, will you give the air one more shot? Just turn it back on and see if it'll do it. Or at least turn the fan on. Give that a shot. Thank you. So here's what I want you to notice. Let's go back to that verse just real quick, Carson. Thank you. So Jesus looks at him and he says, "Follow me." And then Matthew does it. He gets up and he follows him. So I want you to notice when Jesus says this, it is in the present imperative in the Greek. All that means is that when Jesus, it says, "Follow me," this means to do it immediately and then to do it continually. This is not hey, what do you believe about me? Check this box, fill out this card, like make a decision, and then go on about your life, stay at your tax collector's booth. This is to follow me continually, abandon everything you have, and come with me. From now on, leave the life that you've built, leave the ring behind, drop it into Mordor, and follow me. And I want you to notice how Matthew recalls his story. Matthew got up. Immediate response. Now here's what's amazing. That's the same two words and the same in the Greek that Matthew used in the story right before this to describe what happened to the paralyzed man. Jesus forgave his sins, and then he said, so that you will believe that I have the authority to forgive sin, get up, take your mat, and go home. And immediately, the paralyzed man gets up. Matthew uses the same phrase here. Matthew got up. You see it? You know why? Why would he do that? Matthew is tying his story to the story of the man before. Right? It's all this culmination. There's a storytelling. Jesus is Lord over nature. He's Lord over the supernatural. He's Lord of the human heart, if you let him be. And that man's story is my story. And my story is your story. And all of us have very different stories. And Jesus sees all of us, but at the same time, we all have the same need. There's a common denominator. And Matthew's drawing a picture. I'm a tax collector. This guy's paralyzed over here, but we have the same need and the same story. And so Matthew says, I got up. We have the same core need to be rescued, not only from our own self-efforts of saving ourselves, but rescued from our sin and brought right into relationship with God, ourselves, and others. He gets up and he follows Jesus. Why would he do that? Now, again, go back to the story. Matthew's trying to get you to ask the question, who is this man? Have you honestly wrestled with that question? Who is this man? It's the most important question you could possibly wrestle with. I know there's a lot of other demands on our attention and time, but this is important. Who is this man? And Matthew's conclusion, all the way to his story, is Jesus is who he said he is. He's the Son of God. He's Lord over all. So listen, you might not believe that, but let's just say you play it forward. If that's your logical conclusion, if you come to the conclusion that Jesus is indeed who he said he is, he can do what he said he would do, then what's the next response? Anything he says, right? Like seriously, like to just follow the logic all the way through. If it really is true, then the most natural response is to get up and follow him. And so listen, Matthew has built a life. He's been rejected by his entire people. He's got an entire life built around the Roman taxation system, and he literally walks out of the booth to follow Jesus. What does that mean? He abandons everything, all security. He drops the ring into the volcano, and he walks out. There are no eagles, but there is Jesus, right? And you have this moment. That was funny for those of you that have seen the movie. So this is a moment for Matthew where he's saying, I have nothing else to turn back on, right? He can't go get his job back. Game over, you walk out on the Romans, you're dead to them. All your people want you dead. And so your only hope at this point to walk away from everything is Jesus himself, to put it all in. And that's what Matthew is having us do. Who is this man to you? And so listen, so often I sit down with people who are wrestling, like I talked about a moment ago, and I'll say, man, God is pursuing you. Like, don't take that for granted. Like, all of your questions, all of your heartache, all the wrestling, like, I honor that. Ask all the hard questions. Do all the hard work. You should. Don't believe anything because someone else tells you should. But so often I sit down with people who are wrestling with faith and wrestling with Jesus and wrestling with, the bigger questions of life. And I want you to imagine instead, so Matthew's there and Jesus says, follow me. And he steps out of his booth and he says, oh, wow, Jesus, thank you for this invitation. I am really intrigued. But I have some questions. Do you have a moment? Can we, hey, Jesus, can you tell me your views on sexual ethics before we get going here? I'm just curious. I just want to make sure that, I just want to know, can we work this out? Tell me, hey, can you tell me your views on money? I just want to make sure, I know that we should be generous, but what does that really mean? And I've got a lot of money now. So hey, Jesus, will you tell me, hey, you know what? There's some ways that you say things, Jesus. And sometimes, you probably don't mean this, but sometimes the way you say things, they sound kind of exclusive. But there's a lot of really good people out there, Jesus. I'm not one of them, but there's other people that are pretty good. But it seems like are you really the only way? I mean, maybe there's some wiggle room. What do you mean by that? Hey, can we talk about your political views? I really love to hear what you think about, the current political climate that we're in. Right? It's silly in one sense to think of this story playing out like that, but that's how a lot of people approach Jesus' invitation. Oh, Jesus, how nice of you to consider me. I mean, I'm sure I was on your list anyway, but I just got a couple of questions to make sure that my views align, that we're in alignment together before I follow you. But backtrack. If Jesus is really who he says he is, then does any of that make sense? What makes sense is to say yes to Jesus and then ask all those questions as you follow him. But then trust him if you don't like the answer. If he really is who he says he is. And so he just follows him. And again, I'm not here to throw rocks at all, but there's so many people, myself included, that want to see if Jesus is going to line up with my ideologies, my worldview, what I think is right and wrong, how I feel about something in a certain, I know you say this, but this feels this way. And listen, I'm totally sympathetic to the process of working through hard things. But so often, listen, I'm a pastor. When people find out I'm a pastor, they always go for the jugular, every time, right? It's never oh, tell me about your church and how awesome it is and how great the carpet is. Is it orange? Is it old school? Never, right? They're tell me about what you believe about homosexuality, or tell me about what you believe about heaven and hell, and what about people who've never heard of Jesus in Africa? It's always aggressive and upfront, and I'm whoa. I'm do you have an hour or two? Let's talk. But normally I'll respond with, those are great questions. Do you have time and to go grab coffee? And the answer is normally no, because they don't actually care. But normally they have, what do you think about? And they want to bring Jesus up against the ideology, the worldview, the topic. And that's important. Listen, we just finished a series called Wonderful, Controversial Jesus, where we talked about all the hard stuff and said, listen, if you're a follower of Jesus, you should know why you believe what you believe, and you should be able to intelligently respond in the world that you live in to some of the hard questions in our culture. You should be able to do that. But when I'm sitting at a table for coffee with somebody and they have those questions, as often as I'm able, without making it weird, I try to pump the brakes and say, those are really important questions. Those are really great questions. Jesus cares a lot about them. But I would encourage you to back up a step and first just deal with Jesus himself. Not what he teaches, but the person of Jesus. Because if you figure out who Jesus is, all the other stuff will make a lot more sense. And quite frankly, the other way doesn't work. You're going to constantly, if you're always trying to hold the ring, if you're the one that wants to hold on to all the power, then you're always going to have this butt up against Jesus and his authority. And again, not to say that those questions aren't welcome. I think you should ask all the hard questions. We do. There's plenty of questions that are not answered well, in my opinion, and that's okay. But who is Jesus? Who am I? And who is Jesus to me is the most important question that you and I can wrestle to the ground, because everything follows that question. Look at Jesus, understand Jesus, encounter Jesus. Matthew did. And Matthew is calling our stories into account. Here's my story. Do you have a story like that? That's what Matthew is calling us to. Now watch how this plays out. It's pretty amazing. He goes on. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. So this is wild. Not only does Matthew choose to follow him, and he wants you to think about your story for that way, but then in addition, apparently Matthew throws a party and invites all of his friends. Okay? It's at Matthew's house, and many other tax collectors and sinners. And I love the language, right? This is Matthew choosing to identify himself and all of his friends as tax collectors and sinners. This is how all the religious people thought about them. They came together for a party. And listen, you know this, but in the first century, a meal with anybody was not just a sign of like a just minor hangout little thing. This was a sign of affirmation, a sign of fellowship, a sign of family. And so this is a big deal for all the religious leaders. Now watch what happens. Verse 11. When the Pharisees saw this, the Pharisees are the religious leaders of the day, checking all the boxes, doing all the right stuff. They ask the disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? This is ridiculous. These people are unclean. They're all kinds of out of alignment with God and his ways. They look nothing like how they're supposed to look. They're not living according to God's standard and God's laws. Why is this man of God eating with all these people who look nothing like him? Now, I want you to notice here, when the Pharisees saw this, you remember earlier? Jesus saw Matthew, and his response was one way. And then the Pharisees see the same scenario, and they respond quite differently. Do you see it? That's Matthew intentionally doing a play on words for you to connect the dots of how we see people, how we think about God, and how we think about ourselves. And I love this. On hearing this, so I don't know. In my mind, I don't know if this is true, but in my mind, they're in Matthew's house, and there's this huge table, and it's quite the party, and they're having a great time, and Matthew's telling everybody a story of how Jesus has changed his life, and whatever, all that's happening. And the Pharisees are outside somehow, and so I don't know, they let them knock on the door, talk to the window, hey, what's going on? Why is this happening? And so I imagine Jesus is at the table, and then he yells this out the window. Okay, so Matthew and all of his friends are present eating, and then Jesus says, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. And Matthew and all his friends are present. And right, imagine, right? It's not the healthy, but the sick. And he's pointing at Matthew. And I just think about it for a moment. Like if I'm Matthew sitting at the table, I'm like, yeah, that's me. That's right. Right. And I love this moment where like Jesus just calls it like it is. It's not the healthy who need a doctor, right? It's the sick. Or in Jesus' language here, it's not those who think they don't need anything that need my help, right? You guys think you have it all together. You don't need me. You perceive that you don't need me, but the sick do. And I love that Jesus just right in front of Matthew, the sick that need him. And they're like, yeah, they're like high-fiving each other. That's us. We're the sick. We're with Jesus. He's here to help us. I love this moment. And then he responds. He says, go and learn what this means. It's kind of a jab. The religious leaders, they know their Bibles well. And he says, hey, why don't you go do a little Bible study for me? And he quotes an Old Testament verse. I think it's out of Hosea. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. This is a rebuke in the Old Testament to the religious leaders who are focused on doing all the right stuff and missing the heart of what God is after. And here's Jesus' response. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. I've not come to call the righteous, but sinners. Jesus says, if you don't think you're sick, then I can't help you. You can't see what you really need. These guys here, they understand their need. And I'm going to meet them right here in the middle of this, right? And it's incredible. It's incredible. You see, most people approach Christianity like the Pharisees. It's a worldview. It's an ideology. It's I do X, Y, and Z to be in alignment or be right with the big man upstairs or whatever version of Christianity and spirituality and all that you start to work on. But people have this idea of like, okay, if I do X, Y, and Z, then God owes me. He's got to let me into the good place. And actually, maybe if I'm extra good, he owes me right now. I deserve a good life without pain and suffering and blessing and up and to the right. And right, like there's this conclusion that we have that is out of alignment with the way of Jesus. And Matthew is calling our stories into account. He says, this is my story. I was holding onto the ring for dear life, trying to build my own little empire. It was crumbling all around me. And then I met the one who could change everything. But he says, my story is not that much different from the paralytic. And he's leaning in to say, hey, maybe your story is not that much different than mine. There's this tool that we use here at City Church. It's called the Story Tool. It's out in the lobby on our Next Steps desk. It's on our website. We work it into groups where we just equip people to tell their stories. Every time someone gets baptized, which, by the way, if you've not been baptized, it's coming up the next 2 weeks at the end of the last Sunday of every month, right? And every time we do someone's baptism, we have them write out their story. What was your life like before Jesus? How did you meet Jesus? And what has happened in your life since that moment? And again, I think the question that Matthew is calling into account for you and I today is, do you have a story like that? You guys have that next slide? Thank you. Do you have a story like that? Do you have a story like this one? Well, one of my favorite things about this tool is we teach people to talk about, hey, here's my life before Jesus. Here's how I met Jesus. And then Here's my life since Jesus. And then at the end, when you have the chance to share your story with someone, we equip you to ask the question, do you have a story like that? So you share your story, but then you simply invite someone else to consider their own story. Do you have a story like that? That's what Matthew's doing here for you and I. Matthew's telling us his story. My life as a tax collector. I abandoned all my friends, chasing hedonism, success, materialism. I had all the nice things, access to all the pleasure in life, but it was utterly empty and lonely at the top. And then one day out of nowhere, Jesus comes and invades my life. I wasn't looking for him. Maybe I was, maybe in my pursuit of just trying to get a hold of the good life, like God was somewhere behind that effort. So the whole time I'm chasing all of this stuff, and really it's God that I have a need for in my life, but then Jesus shows up out of nowhere, and he sees me, and like really sees me. He sees me like everyone else does, but he sees more than that. And then he calls me. And I had nothing to show. I had nothing to bring. I had nothing to offer but myself. Jesus said, follow me. And so I got up and I left everything, and I did. And now since then, Jesus has saved me. He set me free. I'm experiencing life-giving community for the first time. I'm made right with God. I'm filled with the Holy Spirit. I'm experiencing power and newness like I've never known. All the aches and the loneliness and the despair and the desire in my heart for something more is being filled in a way that I never knew was possible. Do you have a story like that? I was reading this week, and this quote from John Newton has been ringing in my ears. John Newton, at the end of his life, said, "My memory is nearly gone, but I remember two things: that I'm a great sinner and that Christ is a great Savior." Whew. Do you have a story like that? The healthy don't need a doctor. The sick do. Maybe some of you are in your journey with Jesus, and the wrestling is around worldviews and ideologies and ethics and morality, and those are important things. But maybe those things are getting in the way of answering the more important question of, who is this man I'm wrestling with? Who is Jesus? Can he really do in my life what he said he would do? Is he really that good? Is he really that great? Am I really not? As we wrap up our time, I'm going to invite Daniel to come. And I apologize, guys, for the staleness in the room today as our AC decided to be exciting. But hang with me for just a moment. I was reading this book called Becoming Like Jesus by Matt Chandler, and he's working through the Beatitudes, which is like Jesus' most famous sermon right before these stories, right? So Matthew 5, 6, and 7. We looked at it last year. And he just gave this really compelling summary that has had me thinking all week about my life, that I'm somehow wildly loved by God and wildly broken at the same time. That all of my effort and all of my hope on my own is not enough, but all of Jesus is more than enough. Calling my story into account and then thinking, how does this work out real time? Like, it's one thing to come to the end of yourself. It's one thing to see yourself. It's one thing to say, okay, yeah, my life is jacked up, and if Jesus can do something, that's awesome. But then it's another thing to wake up tomorrow and start to, what does it mean to follow Jesus continually for the rest of my life? How does he work all this stuff out where I'm continually becoming more of who I was meant to be? Where the broken things are being shed off and Jesus is making me new, where I'm becoming a person of love. I'm doing things that I never thought I would be doing. People are recognizing and experiencing me in a different way. They're actually experiencing the love of God through my life. Like, how does that get worked out real time? Listen to Matt Chandler on the words of Jesus. Jesus, in the Sermon on the Mount, starts it by saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." The poor in spirit. Those who know they're sick, okay? You tracking with me? So listen to Matt Chandler's words here. This is long, so hang with me. I'm going to read it slow, and I just want you to let these words saturate your heart and mind. Poverty of spirit is what opens the door. Blessed are the poor in spirit, those who know they're sick. When you truly recognize your utter need for God, pretenses collapse, self-reliance crumbles, and something honest begins. This is where every true movement toward Christ-likeness begins. So whether you've never trusted in Jesus or you've been following him for a decade, not with strength, but surrender. And once you see the depth of your need, you begin to mourn. Blessed are those who mourn. And he follows the logic. You mourn your sin and the sin-sick world you inhabit. But with Jesus, this is not despair, but holy grief. The kind that Jesus embodied when he wept over Jerusalem. As Thomas Watson once said, till sin be bitter, Christ will not be sweet. He goes on, mourning softens us, and it makes room for meekness. Blessed are the meek. A gentle posture, not of weakness, but a willingness to trust. The mourner becomes the meek, no longer striving to win, but content to wait. Meekness is strength restrained and directed by faith. And meekness gives birth to hunger. Once you have released control, your soul aches for something greater than self-improvement. It hungers and thirsts for the righteousness of God. This is not the hunger of ambition, but of dependence. A craving not just to be right, but to be rightly related to God, to others, to creation. And that hunger, when genuine, it leads to mercy. Blessed are the merciful. Those who know what it is to thirst are slow to withhold water from others. Unlike the Pharisees, right? To be merciful is not to be sentimental, but rather it's scandalous generosity. And as you show it, it begins to do its work on you. It softens and scrubs the soul. Over time, mercy reshapes the heart. It dislodges bitterness, loosens judgment, clears space for purity, not merely in behavior, but also in motive. The pure in heart are not those without sin, but those without duplicity. Their loves are no longer divided, no longer scattered. They want one thing: God himself. Now, if you're like me, you read these words and there's a stirring, a longing, an identifying of the hungers that you have in your life, a desire to lean into this. He goes on. And in that clarity of devotion, you begin to long to make peace. Blessed are the peacemakers. True peacemaking brings the gospel into fractured spaces. Listen to this. They are not peace lovers who avoid conflict, not peacekeepers who paper over problems. But like Jesus, they don't avoid brokenness. They walk toward it, and they bear the cost. Because peacemaking threatens false peace, it also draws fire. And so we come to the final beatitude. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness. Persecution is not a detour in discipleship. It is a seal of it. It is the backlash of light in a world that prefers shadows. And what does persecution do? It breaks you open again. It brings you back to poverty of spirit. But now you have deeper roots and clearer eyes. The cycle begins again, not as repetition, but as a deepening. This is the Spirit's way. Grace upon grace, layer upon layer, forming Christ in us, not all at once, but over time with precision and power. He describes the process of following Jesus like a coil. You ever seen like a spring, right? Like a little spring on your car, maybe the struts, whatever, and how it goes around in circles. If you lay a spring on its side, it's continually moving forward if you follow the coil, but it's got ups and downs, right? He says following Jesus is like that. You're being formed consistently, but there's highs and there's lows, and there's this continual moment where you come back to the end of yourself and say, man, how much I need you again, God. And I would just invite you into that today. Do you have a story like that? The great invitation of Jesus is to recognize who you are and then to respond to his invitation, to follow him, to trust in him, to receive forgiveness of sin, to be adopted into the family of God, and then to be made new as you walk with him. Let me pray for you. God, thank you so much for the privilege we have of gathering today. Thank you for the reminder, the very simple reminder that you see us. But you don't just see us, you love us. And you don't just love us in word, but in action. That this same Jesus who saw Matthew and invited him to follow him is the same Jesus that would go to the cross and give his life in Matthew's place, to die for his sin, to defeat sin, and to give him new life, to rescue him. May we all hear the invitation today to consider our own story. In some ways, our stories are so wildly unique, so wildly nuanced. Jesus, the scriptures say that you knit us together in our mother's womb. No other person has ever had the story that we have. No other person ever will. There's a uniqueness to every individual that breathes in this room this morning. But also there's a similarity in our stories. A similarity in the temptation to trust in a ring of our own making. A similarity in our need for something greater than ourselves. As we consider our stories, God, could we hold the two tensions well? The healthy don't need a doctor, the sick do. Could we humbly come to you and just fresh and new, no matter where we find ourselves, say, God, I need you. Every moment, every hour. God, I need you. And God, from that place will we learn what it means to follow you. To receive forgiveness, to receive grace. Not to perform for your love, but to be formed by it. We don't earn your love, you freely give it. So God, could we maybe set aside some of the bigger questions, the questions you care about, the questions that you will patiently walk through us with, so that we can bring to the forefront of our story the question, who are you, Jesus? Who am I to you? And how will I respond when you say, follow me? God, would you give us boldness and faith this morning to be like Matthew and to get up, to say yes, to leave it all behind and trust in you. God, I pray for my friends this morning as they consider their stories. Would you meet them in this moment and call them into more? Amen.